If you want to understand how to write a threatening existence story, Tearmoon Empire might not be the first example that comes to mind. But trust me, it should be. I wish I realized this myself sooner. I drove myself crazy trying to think of the right example for this. Every time I thought I had it, something popped up to prove me wrong. John Wick. It's a life unraveled story at its core. Yes, there are lessons about survival, but it's about grief and reclaiming purpose, not pure survival. Home Alone? Nope. Also life unraveled. Death Note? Tempting, but it's about Light's pursuit of godhood, with the cat and mouse game being a subordinate conflict. So, epic transformation. Even Squid Game doesn't fit. They chose to return for the money. I kept going in circles, trying to force examples to fit. But then, in the final stretch of video construction on Saturday, it hit me. Tearmoon Empire is the perfect example. For those unfamiliar, Tearmoon Empire follows Mia Luna Tearmoon, a spoiled princess who's executed by guillotine after her empire collapses. But instead of meeting her end, she wakes up years earlier with a chance to rewrite her fate. The catch? Her selfishness, obliviousness, and reputation are still working against her. Mia isn't trying to save the world or prove herself a hero. She just wants to survive. Yet, through her bumbling efforts to save herself, she ends up helping others, creating rippling effects far beyond her original goal. Through this realization, I've shockingly found some great lessons you can learn for writing your threatened existence story, no matter what it is. Don't believe me? Check this out. Lesson number 1. Start with an overwhelming threat. If you want to write a threatened existence story that truly grabs your audience, you need to start with stakes that feel immediate, crushing, and impossible to ignore. And Tearmoon Empire absolutely nails this. It all begins with Mia's initial predicament. At the start of the story, Mia isn't some brilliant strategist or ambitious heroine. No, she's a condemned princess awaiting execution by guillotine. She's imprisoned, powerless, and reflecting on a life of selfish mistakes that led her to this moment. Her empire is in ruins, her people despise her, and the guillotine isn't just her end. It's a brutal judgment on her failures as a ruler and a person. This is the overwhelming threat in action. It's not some vague, distant danger. It's deeply personal, unavoidable, and devastating. Her own death has already happened. That's what makes this setup compelling. The stakes couldn't be higher, and they hit Mia on every level. Her survival, her legacy, and even her self-worth. And then everything changes. Just when you think it's over for her, Mia wakes up back in time, given a second chance to rewrite her fate. That crushing inevitability of her execution doesn't disappear though. It lingers, driving every action she makes from that point forward. She's not just trying to survive, she's fighting to undo the very judgment that started her journey. The genius of this setup is that it hooks the audience from its very first moment. The overwhelming threat is raw and relatable, stripping down to what truly matters: survival. By starting with a threat so personal and unavoidable, Tearmoon Empire sets the perfect stage for Mia's journey. That's exactly what your threatened existence story should do too. Now, if you want to pull this off yourself, there are many ways you can. I'll give you 3 tactics for this. Tactic 1. Start with the villain. If you want your audience to immediately feel the weight of the danger, introduce the antagonist or threat front and center. Show their power, ruthlessness, or inevitability right from the start. Think Thanos at the start of Avengers Infinity War. This tactic works because it establishes the stakes clearly and makes the threat feel inescapable. The protagonist's struggle begins with understanding and reacting to this overwhelming force. Tactic 2. Isolate the protagonist. An overwhelming threat feels even heavier when the protagonist has no support system to lean on. Take away their allies, strip them of their resources, or place them in an environment where they're completely out of their depth. Starting with the protagonist at their most vulnerable makes the stakes feel personal and immediate because they have to dig deep to survive with no one else to rely on. Tactic 3. Show the cost of failure up front. Let the audience see or feel the consequences of the threat right from the beginning. Maybe another character falls victim to the villain, or the world shows clear signs of the damage the antagonist or danger can cause. In Tearmoon Empire, the opening doesn't just introduce Mia's death. It lingers on the decay of her empire and the hatred of her people. This shows what's at stake if she fails again. By making the cost of failure crystal clear, you build tension and make the audience root for the protagonist to avoid the same fate. Lesson 2. Make your protagonist an active survivor. One of the biggest pitfalls in threatened existence stories is crafting a protagonist who feels too reactive. Someone who merely survives because of luck or other people's efforts. A great survival story thrives on a protagonist who takes charge of their own fate, even if their choices are flawed or desperate. When Mia is sent back in time, she isn't handed a magic wand to solve her problems. She's not reborn as a genius strategist or a warrior. Instead, she's still the same girl with the same flaws, but now she's armed with two crucial tools: her diary and a deep fear of the guillotine. Mia's initial reactions may seem self-serving, and they often are, but her actions are what define her as an active survivor, which you can use for inspiration. For instance, she takes the initiative. From the moment she regains her second chance, she doesn't wait for destiny to play out. She takes steps to ensure her survival, whether it's befriending key figures like Anne or ensuring her political alliances with Sion and Abel. She doesn't just react to her situation. She actively makes decisions to change her fate. She also learns and adapts. Being an active survivor isn't about always knowing the right answer. It's about learning as you go. Mia stumbles, miscalculates, and often finds herself in over her head, but she's constantly adjusting her plans. Her growth isn't linear. She's still Mia, selfish and imperfect, but her willingness to learn is what makes her compelling. She doesn't wait for someone to save her. She builds the skills she needs to save herself. And, while Mia's primary motivation is survival, she gradually begins to attach value to the people around her. Her selfishness shifts as she sees the effects of her actions. Her active efforts to avoid disaster inadvertently bring prosperity to others, and over time, this starts to matter to her. So, with that in mind, there's 3 tactics you can use to make your protagonist an active survivor. First, give them agency, even in small ways. Even if your protagonist starts out powerless, they should always be making choices. These don't have to be grand or world-changing. They can be small, desperate decisions that snowball into something larger. The key is that their action matters. Second, let them make mistakes. Survival isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. Show your protagonist making errors, facing setbacks, and learning from them. This adds depth to your character and makes their journey more compelling. And 3, tie survival to growth. Survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about transformation. As your protagonist fights to survive, let the struggle push them to growth in unexpected ways. Whether it's learning a new skill, forming meaningful relationships, or overcoming a flaw, their journey should change them. Lesson 3. Highlight why survival matters. In a threatened existence story, survival is never just about staying alive. It's about why staying alive is worth fighting for. Tearmoon Empire captures this beautifully through Mia's journey, where her survival isn't just a question of dodging the guillotine. It's tied to her relationships, her legacy, and the future of an entire empire. Let's break it down. At first, Mia's motivation to survive is purely self-serving. She's terrified of death, and who wouldn't be? But as the story unfolds, survival takes on deeper meaning. Mia begins to connect her survival to the fate of others, whether it's avoiding the economic collapse of her empire, protecting loyal followers like Anne, or preventing the people around her from facing the same disaster's end. This layered motivation does something essential. It makes the stakes personal. Readers aren't just rooting for Mia because they don't want her to die. They're invested because her survival has a ripple effect on the lives and futures of everyone she interacts with. So, for you applying this, 1. Tie survival to relationships. Show how the protagonist's survival impacts the people around them. Whether it's families, friends, or allies, make it clear that staying alive means something beyond self-preservation. Mia's bond with Anne is a prime example of this. Her survival directly impacts Anne's happiness and future. 2. Make it about the bigger picture. Frame survival as more than just an individual struggle. Connect it with the survival of an idea, a group, or a way of life. For Mia, survival means rewriting the future of an empire and ensuring a better world for those who come after her. And 3. Evolve the motivation. Start with a simple survival instinct, then gradually add layers. As Mia's story progresses, her motivations shift from fear of death to a desire to make amends and protect others. This evolution makes her journey compelling and her survival meaningful. And lesson 4, Diversify threats. A survival story thrives on variety. If every conflict boils down to run and hide, the story will stagnate. Diversifying threats keeps the narrative dynamic and engaging. Challenge your protagonist in unexpected ways. Here's how to approach this. 1. Develop a variety of antagonists. Each type of antagonist introduces new dynamics and forces the protagonist to adapt. Here are some examples you can use. 1. The relentless force. An ever-present danger that is impartial yet unstoppable. It drives constant pressure and tests the protagonists. 2. The betrayer. Someone the protagonist trusts who turns on them. This adds emotional stakes and explores themes of trust and betrayal. 3. The competitor. Another character vying for the same resources or goals. They're not always an outright enemy, but they can create tension by opposing the protagonist's approach. And 4. The flawed ally. An ally who causes complications to their own issues. Recklessness, fear, or selfishness. This creates interpersonal drama and forces your protagonist to lead. 2. Add subordinate conflicts. Subordinate conflicts enrich the survival narrative by introducing secondary challenges beyond the primary threat. These conflicts create opportunities to showcase the protagonist's adaptability. Examples include resource management, introduce scarcity of food, water, or tools, and force the protagonist to make difficult choices about priorities. Interpersonal tension. In a group survival scenario, conflicts between characters can threaten unity. Use clashing personalities, mistrust, or leadership struggles to complicate survival. You can use moral dilemmas. Make survival choices ethically fraught. For example, does the protagonist save one person at the expense of the group? These choices build character depth. And of course, you got environmental challenges. External forces like weather, terrain, or unexpected hazards can keep the tension fresh. You can also escalate threats through interaction. Subordinate and primary threats shouldn't feel isolated. They should interact, compounding others to heighten the stakes. Here's how you do this. You chain reactions. A moral dilemma, like choosing not to abandon a vulnerable ally, might lead to resource depletion or put the group in direct danger from the primary antagonist. You can have clashing goals. A competitor's interference might escalate the threat of the relentless force. For example, another survivor sabotages a food cache, leading to starvation risks. And you can have the consequences of failure. If a subordinate conflict isn't resolved, it should worsen the primary threat. A lack of resources might lead to diminished physical or mental capacity, making the protagonist less equipped to handle the primary danger. Also, keep the threat evolving. Static threats are boring. Even the most intimidating antagonist loses their edge if they don't adapt. Here's how to evolve your threats. Surprise adaptations. The relentless force learns, evolves, or introduces new variables. For example, the killer robot gets access to better technologies or allies. You can have the escalation of stakes. A betrayer initially undermines the protagonist subtly, but escalates to outright sabotage or violence. And you can have changing dynamics. If the protagonist group starts fractured, allow them to unite, but then introduce a new conflict to challenge the cohesion. Also, during all this, make sure to balance hope and despair. Threat and existence stories rely on tension, but a constant stream of despair can exhaust the audience. Provide moments of hope or small victories to keep the narrative emotionally engaging. For example, a moment where the protagonist secures a critical resource, or a scene where fractured relationships begin to mend, only for new tensions to arise. In Tearmoon Empire, across the volumes, we have diverse antagonists, such as Mia facing the famine, rival nobles like Esmeralda, or her own selfishness. These challenges interact and force Mia to think creatively to survive. Then there is subordinate conflicts like her attempt to secure resources introduces conflict with Ludwig and Fork Road, highlighting both moral dilemmas and practical challenges. And the threat of the famine is constantly evolving. To be precise, it grows more complex as she discovers the causes, requiring diplomatic and logistic solutions, not just personal efforts. So yeah, that's a bit of the beauty of Tearmoon Empire. It's amazing how such a simple, quirky story can offer so much insight into the specific variant of the universal conflicts. Now, despite all this, we're still only scratching a bit of the surface. There is so much to grasp and explore within the conflict alone that I can't contain to one video or example. That's why I've put together Threatened Existence Volume 1, a free PDF designed to go even deeper into this conflict. In it, you'll find a breakdown of how it compares to the other universal conflicts, essentials for writing this, and a dive into the psychological appeal of threatened existence stories. If you're serious about mastering this conflict in your own storytelling, this is where you'll want to start. And if you want to see more of what I have to offer, I recommend clicking whatever video YouTube is recommending right now. I'm sure there's something valuable in it. I made it, after all.